Sophia, do you love me?
My name is Catherine.
Catherine, do you love me?
But of course, my darling, always.
Then pass me my elixir of immortality.
All right, my love. Here you go. Drink then.
Just one more sip, I think. It's very good, you know.
Should help you getting better quickly.
God. Thank you. What is this stuff anyway? Oh, that explains it. The Duke of Wellington, #1. Excellent vintage. Just what I needed. Thank you, my dear.
You're ever so welcome, my love.
Good afternoon, YTPC. I live. That was an adventure and a half. Barely got back alive. Housekeeping, Ben Wade Garrick pipe. Beautiful white stem, very elegant. And the lighter is St. Dupont. It's my good friend John Panzer gave to me a while ago. Beautiful lighter. Smoking still Wellington #2. Slightly bloodied tin because I took it with me and shared it with those there, both in Wellington staff and especially Marshal Blucher, who actually smoked most of it. Hardly any left now. A very good English blend. So what happened? Well, I sat down near to the Mont Saint-Jean farmhouse, which was a perfect landing place, and approached the field hospital there, where Delancey, one of Wellington's staff, his personal assistant, was the commanding watch officer, and his wife was actually serving in the field hospital. So I said I have important information for Wellington and wished to present it to him regarding the French line setups and the events of tomorrow. Well, not much to my surprise, he said, "Who the hell are you?" I presented myself as a member of King George III's Secret Service, who had been doing undercover work in advance of the engagement and wished to share this with Wellington and him alone. Well, he scoffed, but he says, "You better come with me." At the time, Maitland and Uxbridge were also in the room with Wellington. Delancey just had a brief word with him, and he says, "Well, let's see what this mysterious secret agent has got to share with us." Well, Wellington basically said, "You, sir, how do I know you're not an imposter? I've never heard of such an agency, and I've talked with the king only a few weeks ago. I explained, of course, it's a secret agency and that's why he hadn't heard of it. But please allow me to share some documents which you will for sure find interesting. And of course he laid them out on the table and was shocked and astounded. Not perhaps so much that I had some idea of the British lines which were being set up that evening, this was the evening before the battle, but that I had such detail about the French lines. I asked him for 1 hour of his time to explain the events that will follow tomorrow, because we have some intelligence of what Napoleon was planning. I think he was actually taken aback, and his generals also looked at these diagrams which I've shown in my last video, shaking their head as if to say, how could he know all of this? And as I unfolded the information that I knew, which I basically have explained what the strategy would be tomorrow and how things were likely to unfold, not predicting the future but giving my views, and also the location of Blucher. He had to sit down to take it all in, but listened attentively. I found him actually a very pragmatic man, no nonsense, straight to the point. I will attach below a very interesting historical comparison of the personalities of Napoleon and Wellington, which I think you'll find quite interesting. It'll be in a link below. But that helped me to prepare for the discussion with him. And facts are facts, and information is information. So he took me ever more seriously as the discussion went on. I also explained to him what I was going to do tomorrow, which we agreed, of course, that the engagement of Blucher as soon as possible was incredibly important. Although he was only about 6 or 7 miles away, in this terrain and situation, I explained, of course, he's regrouping his forces, which are still quite dispersed and they're not aligned. And what I would want to do is talk with Blucher about how it should go tomorrow, that it would be congruent with what I have told the Duke would happen. Just to fasten both ends together, and knowing, of course, somewhere in this game is a counter agent or some other force or person trying to act in these timelines. And so after explaining that, and you will see now in the next part on this diagram, I will explain Blucher's role in the battle and how I interacted with it. Sorry that this and both this are covered in my bloody fingerprints, but I shall come on to that issue in just a second. So I asked him for his fastest, strongest horse, and said this will be very decisive that I get this work done. I will report back afterwards, but please allow me to help you further. And given he believed me at this point of everything I told him and had absorbed it, he said, well, why don't you take my horse, Copenhagen? It's the finest and fastest. Which was a great measure of trust and belief, I think, in what I'd provided him. By this time almost 2 hours had elapsed, and it was dark, and I didn't know the terrain personally, and I didn't see the advantage of trying to get through darkness. Also, I was aware that someone was gunning for me, and I'd rather try it in daylight first of dawn. Just as I was going out with Delancey, who basically said, well, you can billet with us over there, I said, it's okay, I'll look after myself, I'll see you tomorrow, the horse will meet at this point. Wellington said, I must know, sir, who the devil are you? And I turned to him and said, I can only give you my code name, which is Redcoat's Return. And he looked very sternly at me and then laughed, and his generals around him laughed and said, well, gentlemen, that's it. The Redcoats have come to our rescue. How appropriate. I actually spent a little time with Delancey, who was a delightful guy, fantastic person, and very friendly, and in a way I almost regret I got to know him a little bit, knowing then what was going to happen later on, but you can't change everything in the timeline, and some things have a way of happening whatever you do. Early by dawn I was ready, saddled up, Copenhagen, a 15-hand horse, a magnificent animal. I've done a bit of horse riding in my time. I'm not fantastic, but I had a good feeling with this horse. Mounted him, felt very comfortable. Had my documents for Blucher, and off I set. Well, you may say 6 or 7 miles, that's nothing. You must have been there in 20 minutes. No, these roads were god-awful. And I could go at about maybe 20 miles an hour. The horse could have gone faster for sure, but it would have been dangerous. An easy gallop in any case. I wanted to get there as soon as possible. Now, around 15 minutes of riding, I was making good progress, not far from the town of Bourgeois. I noticed, I had a feeling that somebody was behind me, and I just turned like this to look back. My coat was open, flapping away, as it was getting already warm. It was June, so although it rained a lot and it was wet, it was still very warm and humid, and of course horse riding makes you sweat. And as I turned round, I saw a dark figure, almost black, and on a almost black horse, and a flash. And within a second or two of that flash, there was a thump in my side and a sharp pain. I had been shot. The thump was accompanied with a loud clang. Now, as I said, I did take my little ashtray with me and filled it full of coins. I'm very glad that I did that, because as you see here, there is a hole in it. Came in this side, and lucky for me, the coins were nicely positioned to absorb what was a musket ball, a pistol musket ball fired from 20 yards away on horseback. End of my George III coin collection, by the way. They were all banged up, but better that than it would have hit me at full velocity. Here's a Carter Hall ashtray, and this is the bullet that my wife, the musket ball that she removed from me much earlier this morning. and you will see that nice dent where it hit the coins. And fortunately that took a lot of energy out of this bullet, and it did penetrate but not very deep. Banged my ribs up, one of them in particular, but not cracked, and I was dead lucky. Now, as you remember, I took my Walther PPK with me, and I could see that the figure had actually stopped his horse to take a clear shot at me, and I pulled Copenhagen around, pull up my PPK and took careful aim and fired 3 consecutive shots. He had obviously seen me in this maneuver and started to prepare his horse to head in the other direction. First one missed, the second one didn't, neither did the third. The figure slumped and slowly slid off the horse. Now I was about 20 yards still away from him, and I thought I should find out who this is. Is this the other time traveller? Or was this an assassin who was listening to my discussions with Wellington? I guess I'll never know, because I decided time was of the essence, and I wasn't sure if there were more of these characters along the way, and decided to make all speed to connect with Siefen's force, which was in the 2nd Corps and the closest, which I did. Next section I'll explain that now in detail. So we come to what happened, and my meeting with Blücher and some of his generals. As agreed, I set off with Copenhagen, and I knew basically roughly where Blücher would be at this time, and here are basically his 4 armies. From Ziethen, the 1st Corps, Pirch, who was in the 2nd Corps, just the other side of Wavre, Bülow, his right-hand man, who was the 4th Corps, and Thielmann is up here with the 3rd Corps. Now you see basically the problem of the situation. These guys had assembled, but they were disassembled as armies. They were exhausted. They'd done marches in rain, and it was June, so in the daytime it could be also hot, so they had a real problem. They didn't want to arrive in the battle as a rabble, and they needed to get their act together, and they were still not really physically together. This is where Grouchy ended up. Grouchy, sorry. I call him Grouchy. He ended up here, but he was another day almost behind them before he got to this position. By the time Grouchy arrived here, these armies had moved on, and it was practically too late. My personal opinion was that he was almost avoiding the fight. His second in command advised that they split, and he'd take half the force to the battle because they could hear it going on. And Grouchy refused and said he didn't want to divide his force. He wanted to stay at strength in case he could engage Blücher, which he never did. So, or not in any significance. There were some skirmishes, but these were some defending forces which wanted to cover the advance of most of the army into the battle. It was all too late by the time Grouchy arrived. So this ride here, you're talking here about 6 miles. Now, many of you would say, 6 miles, what were they doing? You know, they should have got in there. An army could maybe do 10 miles was pretty good in a day. You have to realise that these main roads were what we would call country lanes today, unsurfaced, and often as soon as you got bad weather you got potholes and mud, and they turned into almost rivers of mud and water. And these are almost footpaths, these little lanes here. That could come in useful to us, and did later on. But you can't move an army. There's no width. You'll end up with loads of them in the fields, and trudging and slashing away through there. And you've got a lot of cannon and horses, and makes a huge amount of noise. Plus you wanted to defend your advance and be careful, because there were French pickets out looking for, here in the Parry Woods, for example. We encountered some later. So you had to be careful. This is about just before Bourgeois. We actually, this is where I was hit, if you like, by my pursuant. I'd actually made very good time. It was like just 15 minutes to get to that point. And then going over to the north, when I'd recovered, I met Seethen in the First Corps. And da ich eigentlich Deutsch sprechen kann, war das eigentlich gar kein Problem, uns zu verständigen. It was no problem for us to communicate. They had an old German, I must say. Old Prussian German was not the same as the modern one, but we understood each other, and as they knew I was English, they kind of put it to the side and thought, well, of course he's not going to speak it perfect. And I basically discussed this plan, as you see before you, with him first, and said I must get to Blucher to discuss this. And he basically then said there's a meeting at Bülow's camp shortly, let's go there now, I'll give you an escort and we can talk, and Pirch will be there and Thielmann will be there. At this point there was a fire going on in Wavre which was creating complete havoc, and that made the advance of some of these forces who were around the area also difficult for complicated reasons. The amazing thing is, in this whole story, it's so complicated when you get into the detail. By the way, I can really recommend this book. This is by Robert Kershaw. It's a superb, one of the most detailed books to read, which tells you exactly what was going on. I had read it one time through before I left, and it was extremely helpful. I didn't take it with me, it was too risky if it would get into the wrong hands, and obviously someone was trying to get me in their hands. So with Blucher, a charming fellow, really, tough as nails. I mean, that's how I describe Blucher. Over 70, and he was fit as a fiddle, and he'd been injured by a horse rolling on him already. He lost a couple of horses in the first engagement, and he was saying, I'm all right, let's get up. And actually he had quite some injuries, but he was able to move about and suppress the pain, and we discussed what to do. And of course he already knew that Wellington needed him now. So roughly here we're at about midday that I got there after the discussion and this interlude here at Bourgeois, which rather delayed me. And the battle had started in 11:30, was in full swing. So he of course, I saw it, his forces were dispersed, they needed to be assembled, they needed to be grouped. There was only one or two approach roads here, And you see basically what they did finally. My advice was to stay under cover of the woods and attack at Plancenoit, and also the eastern flank of Napoleon's forces here. They would then only be seen rather late, and the main force came along here. This was where Ziethen's forces came along and took some of his forces and joined with Wellington on his eastern flank here, and that relieved lots of Wellington's men to prepare for the advance of the Old Guard a little bit later, towards the end phase of the battle. So this all took time to get them there, and it was getting towards 4:30 when the Prussian forces had assembled and in mass were starting to get this flow going and reinforcement, rather several hours late for Wellington, but just in the nick of time. And this allowed him to really strengthen his central force, which is not what the Old Guard would have expected. They expected a very decimated force, and they didn't expect him to move every gun to them, as Wellington said when they realized this was going to happen. And he knew it was going to happen because I told him. Now I asked Bülow, look, what I can do, give me 20 men, and what we'll do is we'll move here to Lasny. Now I knew that Lasny was fairly undefended. There wasn't really this, I think, Napoleon could have just left messengers dotted around some of these villages to make aware then when anyone was moving in, and he didn't. So that was an opportunity. And give me 10 small barrels of gunpowder and some fuses. And what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll draw attraction to Plancenoit and blow up as much as we can. And some of the ammunition, and maybe that will already encourage Napoleon to draw some of his forces off of the Old Guard. So I would like to weaken that force before it advances. So that was agreed to, and off I went on Copenhagen, and he knew he had to mobilize as fast as he could. He knew where to go to the Paris woods and strengthen the flank here of Wellington. So these lanes, as I said, were nothing better than paths. They were god-awful, but on a good horse, you could manage it, but I couldn't go that fast because there was only one other rider with me, and we had to approach, if you like, stealthily, which we did, and we've got to Lasny. It was no issue. There was almost no, just civilians, and refreshed the horses a little bit. See, on these lanes, this is like 3 miles. This took an hour to get there, and that was us, a mobile small force. And then headed along the Lasny River here, and there was a small forest here next to Plancenoit. Now we were always expecting to find pickets along this way, and fortunately the whole eyes were to the front and interest with the front, and Plancenoit was partly being used as a logistic location, so everyone was shifting stuff up to supply the trips here. It means Eigenich here on the flank, they weren't really expecting anything, and we were able to stealthily come in and set. We only actually got 6 barrels of the gunpowder, put them in place, 5-minute fuses, and I said, we're going to have to retreat now like the devil, because the first one goes off, they'll be searching everywhere. And my plan then was to head for the Paris woods, leave that force there. They could take out some of the French pickets while the other forces came forward and then unite with their countrymen. And I would be off back to Mont Saint Jean in that direction to unite again with Wellington. And hopefully, if things were going well, prepare my departure. And return his horse above all, which was important for history. So that worked quite well. A couple of us, in fact, were snagged and one killed, but on this retreat. And here in the woods there were some French pickets, so there was an engagement there. But I didn't stay for that. I had to get back and tell Wellington, you know, the penny is definitely dropped over here. They know what to do. They're coming, and they will emerge here. And in the meantime, by the time I'd reached this, and I was going with that horse on that terrain, it was fantastic that we could do 20 to 25 miles an hour. That doesn't sound that fast, but you need a horse with speed and stamina, which absolutely, this Copenhagen horse was actually sired by 2 Derby winners, and his grandfather was a super Derby winner, so he had all the capabilities. And I was able to then return. We actually hit the small munition store. That was good news. That made a hell of an explosion. And Napoleon decided to take his young guard here, you see. This is part of the old guard, is the young guard, and apply it to defending Place Noire, because he realized this was starting to begin. And that's exactly what I wanted to happen. So this meant that the attack of the entire guard here would be not quite as strong as it would have been without this activity. One does what one can do. I'm sorry about the blood here, this is mine, but I was pointing, of course, to places on this map, and left a copy with Marshal Blucher, of course. And that brings me back to the end phase and my last discussion with Wellington. So, that's actually what happened. All I had to do now was return to the TARDIS and perhaps say farewell to Wellington. The battle was going exactly how we wished it to happen, but it was all a question of minutes in the end that made the difference. So by the time of the late evening, I had returned, and the first person I met again was Delancey, who was delighted to see me, and everyone was very jubilant, and he invited me to come and see the Duke, which I said I had other business to finish, but yes, of course, who would not want to see the Duke? As I rode towards Waterloo, I could pick up the stink and the smoke of gunpowder and the strange, revolting air of death. And the nearer I got, the more I saw the carnage and the piled up dead. 50,000 soldiers killed on that day. A horrendous battle. The Duke invited me for a toast and a farewell drink, thanked me for returning his horse, and presented me with the first Waterloo medal. He said we normally wait until the troops have returned to England before we issue these, but we had great belief in our ability to have the success, and he had some of these for field awards for some of his favourite commanders in this battle, and I was very pleased to receive one. I'll give you a close-up of it. Now at that point, of course, I'd lost quite a bit of blood and was feeling, as you saw on the landing sequence, absolutely exhausted. And I'm very lucky, of course, that I have a fantastic power of homeostasis, as a Time Lord would. And the elixir of immortality. So that was a great adventure. Hope you enjoyed it. I would recommend, if you like a mild English blend, try this Waterloo. It's very pleasant. I smoked, it must be 10 bowls during the last couple of days, or it may be even more, and thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's absolutely without any tongue bite or any issues. So give it a shot and take a glass of this too. Cheers everyone. Bye bye.